Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fortnightly IRENA Insights webinar series. My name is Jadav Davle, and I'm from the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center located in Bonn, Germany. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, please allow me to introduce you to our organization and our Insights webinar series. IRENA is an intergovernmental organization with 168 member countries and another 16 countries that are in the accession process. Our main mandate is to support countries in their transition to a sustainable energy future. IRENA's analytical work and our engagement with our members generates a lot of valuable insights across the renewable energy spectrum. Hence, we are always searching for different avenues through which we can communicate these insights with our stakeholders and the public at large. This is the main reason why we launched the IRENA Insights webinar series, which we run every other week, usually on a Tuesday. These Insight webinars started in January 2020, just before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has led to a growing recognition and proliferation of many virtual events. To date, we have organized over 40 webinars on various topics. You can access them all on our IRENA events webpage and our dedicated YouTube channel. We appreciate as well as recognize that there are many other longer and deep dive webinars available on the internet. But what we try to do here in these Insight webinars is the contrary. That is, we try to keep these webinars short and concise. These Insight webinars last approximately 30 minutes, which clearly entails that we cannot cover all the aspects being presented, but rather the aim is to give you a critical mass of information for you to decide whether you would want to delve deeper into the topic being presented. To facilitate this, we signpost in our presentation further resources to which you can gain more in-depth information on the topic. Next slide, please. So today, while you enjoy your beverage or food of preference, in the next 30 minutes, I'm very excited to announce that we are going to hear from Mr. Herib Blanco, who is a hydrogen energy expert at IRENA. In his presentation today, Herib will be sharing key takeaways and touching upon the following hydrogen-related topics. 1, the potential and cost of renewable hydrogen. 2, technology options and cost comparisons to trade hydrogen. And 3, how 2050 could look like for hydrogen trade in a 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario. The webinar is based on a trilogy of IRENA reports released in 2022. But before I hand over the microphone to Herib, I would briefly like to highlight a few usual housekeeping items, which I'm sure you are all aware of. Next slide, please. We are recording the webinar and we will be posting the recording and slides on IRENA's events webpage within the next 48 hours. I would like to inform you all that you all are on mute, but if you have any questions for our expert, we kindly request that you use the Q&A function to post your questions, and we will try to address them towards the end of the webinar. With these housekeeping rules done, and without further ado, please allow me to welcome and pass the floor to Herib. Herib, welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi, Jada. Good day, everyone, and thanks, Jada, for the introduction. So to start the presentation today, I thought I would put in perspective the topic. So today we're going to discuss trade specifically, this series of these 3 reports, but I wanted to put it in the broader perspective of the set of reports that IRENA has produced in the last 2 years. This is what you see on the screen. So the focus for today is on technology and cost for trade technologies, but earlier this year, we produced a report on geopolitics of hydrogen. That includes the trade, but also aspects like energy security and the emergence of new players in the energy landscape. So that's all covered in this geopolitics report. But before, we also had a report looking at the technology for electrolysis, gaps, and how to get the cost down for the electrolyzer, and also for the status of the cost for the electrolyzers and patents. So innovation indicators, that was also produced earlier this year. We also have a couple of publications on the demand side, innovation outlooks for renewable methanol and ammonia, which are hydrogen derivatives, covering everything from project pipeline to cost to policies. These 2 reports, and a couple on shipping and end-use sectors for industry. And we also have a couple of reports on policies for infrastructure and supply, for industry and general for policymaking. And enabling measures roadmaps. So how can the short term look like, and some actions for Europe and Japan specifically. And all of this is covered in a kind of an overarching publication that we have, which is WITO, the World Energy Transitions Outlook, where hydrogen is put in perspective, in the broader perspective of the energy transition and other technologies. So with that in mind, of where these publications fit, as Jaidev mentioned, what I will cover is basically the technology options for long distance transport. How can 2050 look like, and what can we do in the short term to be closer to that 2050 picture. So first, a bit of context for the ones that do not know that much about hydrogen. So hydrogen in the left, we see the current production. Hydrogen is used mostly for industry as an industrial feedstock for chemicals and refining. The amount is 120 million tons. That to put it in perspective is 2.5% of final energy demand. And the same percentage, 2.5% of global CO2 emissions, come from hydrogen production. Today, hydrogen is produced mostly 3/4 from natural gas and 1/4 from coal gasification, mainly in China. And electrolysis is a very small fraction today, less than 1 gigawatt. While in the future, if we look at the total flow, it would have to grow by a factor 5-6. So from 120 million tons to, depending on the scenario, 600 to 800 million tons. That's one big change, the growth, but the other is the growth is even more stark. It's even starker for the electrolysis, which is less than 1 gigawatt today, and in the future, electrolysis needs to go to 4 or 5 terawatts. And if that's the different scenarios have a final energy demand for hydrogen between 12 and 22%, from 2.5% today. So it's a huge growth needed and a big change in the flows. And in the future, it will also go beyond industry to sectors like shipping, aviation, and steel, for example. So that's just some basic information around hydrogen. Going specifically for the trade component. So trades, hydrogen has the characteristic that it has a low energy density. So it's difficult to handle. We need to convert it to something else to make the transport easier. And that's something else, we have several options. So we can liquefy it to have liquid hydrogen. We can convert it to ammonia. We can convert it in, this is liquid organic hydrogen carriers. So these are oil-like molecules that react reversibly with hydrogen. And we can compress it and use pipelines. So for these are the main ones. There are others, but I'll focus on this. And then for each of these steps, we need a conversion step. So from hydrogen to the carrier, the transport step itself, shipping or pipelines, and then reconversion, so recovering the hydrogen from that carrier. So all of these are hydrogen carriers, but we could convert hydrogen to something else like methanol, synthetic fuels, or steel that are not represented in the picture, but those are called hydrogen derivatives. And then those offer an alternative to transport hydrogen as well. And it can be cost effective. So focusing on this, again, just remember 4 pathways, 3 conversion steps. And then what you see in the color coding is an approximation of the technology readiness level, so TRL. The higher the better. Green means it's already commercial scale. Red means it needs further work. And then the split is just because of large scale on the left, the small scale on the right. So these are kind of the introduction to the pathways. If we go a bit more detail into a qualitative comparison of the carriers that we saw in the previous slide, starting with ammonia. Ammonia has the advantage that it's already an existing market today. There are 180 million tons of ammonia, that's the annual consumption. So it's already commercial scale, the production. It has already existing infrastructure. 10% of the ammonia is already globally traded today. So that's an advantage. A big disadvantage is ammonia. If we need hydrogen from ammonia, we need to crack it. So the recovery process could take anywhere between 13 and 34% of the energy contained in the hydrogen. So we lose 1/3 of the energy if we want to crack it. However, we can avoid that step by using ammonia directly. Either as it is today in fertilizer industry, for example, but also in future uses like shipping fuel. So in the future, the ammonia market is expected to grow by a factor 4 or 5. So ammonia could be used directly for that market rather than as a hydrogen carrier. Looking at the second option, liquid organic hydrogen carriers, these are, again, oil-like molecules. So the current infrastructure used for oil derivatives could be used for LOHC. That's a big advantage. A big disadvantage is that it takes also about a third of the energy to recover the hydrogen from these molecules. And different than ammonia cracking, that step, the dehydrogenation step, is needed for LOHC because LOHC cannot be used directly. So that's one disadvantage. And the other is that only 4 to 5% of the weight of the carrier is hydrogen itself. So then a lot of the energy goes into transporting the carrier rather than hydrogen. And for liquid hydrogen, it's already commercial today. That's a big advantage, but we could again lose about a third of the energy in the liquefaction step just because of the low temperatures needed. And the scale is also relatively small. Today, the largest liquefaction plant is around 30 tons per day, while what would be needed for global trade of hydrogen would be hundreds of times larger than that. So that's a qualitative comparison. In terms of the quantitative comparison, looking at cost specifically, what we see in this diagram is basically the two key parameters that define the technology that is the most attractive: project size and distance. So to put these numbers in perspective, 1 million tons of hydrogen per year, that's equivalent to 10 gigawatts of electrolysis, producing at 60%, or 5 commercial ammonia plants. And then what we see here, it's the areas, the conditions that favor one of the pathways. So for short distances, pipelines are the most attractive. Between 2,000 and 3,000 kilometers is where pipelines are attractive. As we get to longer distances, so to the bottom of the chart, ships become attractive, and specifically ammonia ships are the most attractive. For regions that have existing natural gas pipelines, like Europe, China, US, and Canada, those pipelines could be repurposed to hydrogen. That decreases the cost, and that expands the area where repurposed pipelines are more attractive. So that's why you see the range of the distance expands. And to put these numbers in perspective, going from east to west of the US would be around 4,000 kilometers. Going from east to west of Europe would be around 2,000 kilometers. And the range of costs is what you see on the right, somewhere between 2.5 and 4.5 for ammonia LOHC. Liquid hydrogen is a bit more expensive. And what you see in the shaded area is just the uncertainty capture in scenarios, so minimum and maximum cost. And liquid hydrogen has a higher cost because of the cryogenic temperatures needed. So how can we get the cost down for the transport? So this is only for the transport step. We could go, and this is an example for ammonia, but you can find in the report the other pathways. So we see basically 3 levers for cost reduction. The first is economies of scale, and then that's what creates the largest cost benefit. Already going from pilot scale to large scale can reduce the cost by 70%. And others are innovation, so improving the energy consumption and reducing the energy losses of the technology, and learning by doing, so global deployment. And with those, we could reach the level of below $1 per kilogram, which is a critical level for competitiveness. And we could also reach below $1 per kilogram for production, because remember, this is only transport. So putting these pieces together in a scenario for 2050, this is one possibility. So this is optimistic scenario, so one where all the costs are as low as possible for all the way from PV to electrolyzer to the trade technologies, to the conversion technologies. And then what we see is about a quarter of all the flows that you see are a quarter of the hydrogen and ammonia production. Blue is for ammonia, green is for the hydrogen by pipelines. So it's about 50% through ammonia ships, 50% through through hydrogen pipelines. And then you see for pipelines, it's most of a regional flow, so intra-Europe and some in Latin America, but mainly taking advantage of repurposed pipelines in Europe. And the other big for pipelines is import into Europe from North Africa. But in general, you see pipelines are for kind of short distance, the same that we saw in an earlier chart. And ammonia ships are for longer distances. However, you see for ammonia ships, it's also relatively short flows. It's not as global as oil is today, for example. And the other quick comment here is that about 70% of the ammonia is used directly for the growing ammonia market that I mentioned. So then that conversion steps, that ammonia cracking that I mentioned is avoided because it's used directly. So that also is also in line with what I mentioned earlier. The other factor is that if all the costs for production and transport, if we do the innovation and economies of scale and learning by doing and so on, the production costs and the transport costs could reach a level below $1 per kilogram each. So that makes it very competitive. That makes also, combined with the fact that renewables are basically everywhere in the world, it's not a couple of countries that have renewables, that creates a lot of flexibility for importers to import, to have a diversified pool of exporters where they can select from. Therefore, a lot of the discussion goes to production costs and transport costs, but the trading pairs will also be defined largely by geopolitical factors. Things like the status of the renewable industry, how developed the hydrogen industry is, stability of the country, targets, and so on. Those will have a large impact on the trading flows, specifically because, again, these production transport costs will achieve low levels, and therefore it will not be a large differentiator between countries if we reach those low costs. So therefore the trading pairs will be largely defined by these geopolitical factors. Yeah, so that's the key message here. And here it's an example of an area of action on how to get from where we are today to the future. In the reports, we identify 7 areas, but I focus here on one, certification. But you can find in the report a similar diagram. So basically, how can the short term look like, and what are the milestones, basically. So the need for certification is because we need to, hydrogen doesn't have any CO2. So all the CO2 emissions are associated to its production, transport, and end use. And then we need to track it to ensure sustainability. Certification is also needed for the market creation component and to allocate economic incentives. So what we see here is basically what part of the value chain is being certified. Currently, there's a lot of focus on the production step, on electrolysis and reforming. But we also need to bear in mind, well, for global trade, we need to certify the transport. Hydrogen needs to be, could be converted as well to hydrogen derivatives like ammonia, methanol, steel. So certification needs to expand to those as well. And then it also needs to keep consistency with the current efforts of certifying those derivatives. And hydrogen could also be converted further to materials. Again, steel, and steel you can convert it to something else. So here the main point is, well, the certification scope needs to cover all the steps. It can take a modular approach where you certify separately each of the steps. And also the focus needs to be balanced, shifting a bit from production where it is now to cover the rest of the value chain. That's one message here. And the other is when we look at this part of the diagram, a lot of the focus today is on greenhouse gas, some methane emissions and CO2. But there are some schemes arising with attention to the other environmental aspects like land use and water, for example, but even social and governance issues as well. Yeah, so some key takeaways. This is partially from the presentation, partially from the set of reports. So one is that ammonium pipelines are attractive in the long term, but they also provide a good starting point today. Ammonia has already existing infrastructure that could be used, especially if we certify the green ammonia and use that existing infrastructure, and natural gas pipelines could be repurposed to hydrogen. The most influential parameters for the hydrogen trade from the cost perspective are capital costs and weighted average cost of capital. So how much are we paying the interest paid on that capital? But as I mentioned in one of the slides, factors beyond cost could have a larger effect on trade, flows. And the other is that hydrogen derivatives, things like, again, methanol, ammonia, steel, and synthetic fuels, the trade of those might be more relevant than pure hydrogen trade, just because those derivatives, they have a higher energy density than hydrogen, therefore a lower cost of transport, therefore higher shares of transport. So that's all I had for today. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Harib, for this great presentation. I think your presentation clearly gave a very good perspective on hydrogen and the trends that are happening in with regards to its trade. And as we all, I think, know that this energy source is going to be the future of the global energy transition. So therefore, I think action needs to be taken by the international community to create the environment for this to become a reality. There are a few questions that we have got from the audience. So Harib, I'll ask one that just actually came in. So one of the participants mentions that on slide 6 of your presentation, you demonstrated that green hydrogen could provide a majority of the future hydrogen demand. And this participant would like to know your opinion whether or not this is feasible, and what could be the major challenges with regards to scaling up. So yes, how would you respond to that question?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, well, hydrogen needs to go by a factor 5-6 into the future. The analysis that I showed only covers hydrogen and ammonia trades. We didn't consider trade of other hydrogen derivatives. So that's one caveat. And I think the question was also around challenges.
Yes.
So challenges. Yeah, so one key one is cost. Hydrogen is more expensive than current other options, from production to transport to end use. So that's a big one. The other is market creation. There's limited demand for what hydrogen can deliver, so the lower emissions from renewable hydrogen. And then, yeah, there needs to be a market pool that promotes, that incentivizes the renewable hydrogen. So that's another big one. And there are others, but another key one is infrastructure. There's limited infrastructure today, 4,600 kilometers of pipelines, and limited hydrogen trade today. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Harib. We also have another question from another participant who wants to know whether hydrogen trade from North Africa to Europe, and this participant wants to know whether ammonia conversion or pipeline is the best option for this trade. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so North Africa has the advantage of being close by. Today, there are already pipelines transporting natural gas with a capacity of equivalent of 60 gigawatts. That would be enough to transport 12 million tons of hydrogen. So from North Africa, again, the short answer is, well, since it is close by, pipelines could be attractive, but there are also projects. There's, for example, now a project that is looking at shipping from Portugal to Rotterdam. Portugal is not North Africa, but it shows that even though it's close by, shipping is also being considered. So both.
Super. Thank you. Another question that's just come in is the attendee would like to know, how do you see the demand for e-methanol and green hydrogen evolving given the current electricity prices? Only if vertically integrated renewable energy sources are included, it makes sense at the moment. So basically, he wants the attendee wants to know your views on the demand for e-methanol and green hydrogen, given the context of the electricity prices that we have right now.
Yes, so I'll break it down in two: the current energy crisis and the high prices. The thing is that projects do not get built overnight. So whenever the projects that are on paper today are operating, the energy prices will be different. So then even though current prices have provide an input to the decision, yeah, it will be different when the assets are operating. So green hydrogen, yes, it is more attractive today, but yeah, we don't know for how long. Energy prices are expected to remain high for a couple of years, but again, you cannot take a 30-year decision for the whole lifetime just based on current prices. And then the demand for e-methanol. One disadvantage of e-methanol is the CO2 source. So then large volumes are required. Direct air capture makes it too expensive. and biogenic CO2 is limited. So then, yeah, the volume that you could produce of e-methanol, yeah, is limited and geographically bounded because of the biogenic CO2.
Thanks, Arab. Another question that we have from a participant is just to share your views on the advantages of using existing gas pipelines to transport and trade hydrogen. So what are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. So that depends on the specific material. It needs a case-by-case assessment. In Europe, that assessment has been done by different TSOs, and yeah, in Europe there are studies that part of the natural gas pipelines could be repurposed. But it needs to be done on a specific basis, again, depending on the material. Another aspect on natural gas is leakage. So from natural gas pipelines, we know there are methane leakage. We have to understand better, further research is needed to understand how hydrogen leakage could, what hydrogen leakage could be from those pipelines. And further research is needed to both quantify and assess how much is leaking and the global warming impact of that hydrogen. So it is a possibility, it is attractive, it makes it more cost effective, yeah, but also further work is needed there.
I think the attendee just would like to know if you have any thoughts with regards to the Indian context, because this was a question. So do you have any idea on how this could work in India, or yes?
When you say this hydrogen or this natural gas?
The gas pipeline question that I asked, if you have any knowledge on that.
Okay. Yeah, the materials would need to be assessed, again, for the specific network to see if it's suitable, and to assess the maintenance practices in India for the leakage component.
Okay. Super.
So it depends on the material. Yeah.
Super. Another question that has also come in is just to share your opinion whether or not it is realistic to bring green hydrogen from the Middle East to Europe via a pipeline, for example, that's 5,000 kilometers in length, and how would this work? Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, probably there it makes more sense to the ammonia ships, because again, Middle East is a bit too far, and there's an example of a large project from Agua Power that is looking at ammonia. And then you could use, for this specific project, they're aiming to reconvert it to hydrogen. But in general, from Middle East, what you could do is basically ammonia ships, and then use ammonia directly to displace the current ammonia use in chemical industry. Yeah, that could be one attractive use, but pipelines would be challenging and difficult to justify with that distance.
Okay, great. I guess the final question that we can ask, I could like to ask you for this segment is how do hydrogen pathways compare with an energy efficiency and electrification pathway in the matter of cost reduction for Europe, as it is envisioned that Europe is going to become a major importer of green hydrogen? So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely I should have clarified that it's a matter of prioritization. First, electrification, first, renewables. That's the most efficient use of the electricity. The thing is, electrification is not, it needs further research in some areas. For example, it will be difficult to electrify in international shipping or aviation. And then that's where hydrogen derivatives come in. So to answer your questions, I think, well, it's complementary. It's not a competition. Hydrogen covers and complements the areas where electrification is not possible. And definitely energy efficiency is also goes first. Reduce energy demand as much as possible, and then the mitigation pathways like electrification hydrogen.
Super. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're already coming to a close of 30 minutes. And again, thank you so much, Harib, for your time and taking, sharing your knowledge with us on the hydrogen production and trade markets. I'd also like to thank all the attendees joining us today for listening and also posing such interesting questions. We really hope that you learned something new. What comes next? I mean, we're already planning the next series of webinars as part of this Insight webinar series. So the next webinar will actually take place in 2 weeks. And the focus of this webinar will be on the nexus between energy and agriculture, with a particular focus on the application of the geothermal energy. Registrations for that will be opening up soon, and we hope that you can join us for that webinar as well. So this concludes our webinar for today. As I mentioned, the recording and presentation slides will be available within the next 48 hours on the events webpage. So please do visit the webpage. And I wish you all a very good day. Goodbye, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you.